Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Painted Porch Strategies. We are here with our little book club going on. We are a handbook for new Stoics, and this week is week 22, Roll with the Insults. My name is Sierra, and I am joined by the beautiful Amy Yakowski and the illustrious Rob Hunter. So in this week's lesson, they start out with a great question. How much do you care about what other people think of you? Well, that's a landmine, isn't that? Mm-hmm. Wow, how much do you care about what other people think of you? So oftentimes people have an opinion of us. And sometimes you get like, oh, you're so great, you're so fantastic. And then other times you get an insult, right? Or even a backhanded compliment. So what they want us to talk about here is the discipline of action. So when people give you feedback, or when people insult you, either to your face or behind your back or on social media, how do you take it? What do you do with that feedback? Now, they give us an example of a guy named Emil who takes it really personally. When people criticize him to his face, or he hears gossip about himself, and he usually defends himself. He usually feels really upset. But Epictetus says, if someone tells you that so-and-so speaks ill of you, do not defend yourself against what he says, but answer, he did not know my other faults, or he would not have mentioned these alone. So in other words, it's like he's making a little joke. Like, oh, well, I have a lot of faults. This is just like a couple of them. So what do you guys think about let's just talk about like insults and how you might respond to receiving an insult.
I'll let you go first.
I like the approach of the do nothing, because they give you the two examples, the do nothing approach and they do the humor approach. So over the years of being on the radio, you throw out opinions, you get criticized. And I actually implement this in part of my course. And we should mention the reason we're doing this as a group, Painted Porch Strategies, and we go through this lesson, these Stoic lessons, is because, I'll hold it up so you can actually see it again. We believe in these principles and we teach what we teach, in Sierra's case, mindfulness, in my case, communications, in Amy's case, teamwork, through these principles. Because if you implement these principles in your life or in your workplace or at your home, you will be able to handle insults a whole lot better and so many other things. So when I was first a young radio guy, the insults used to sting because I wanted everybody to like me. Then I realized when you give out opinions, that's impossible. Especially it's sort of a one-way relationship because you're talking into a microphone. You're not talking to a crowd. You don't see people. So people essentially know you a lot more than you know them. And with that comes a sort of lopsided part of criticism. In fact, I think it was last week, someone reached out to me. She really hates my laugh. And she's made note of this on several different occasions. But she went further this time and called me an ugly little freak. Don't know why. But I just decided, okay, just moved on because I've been digging into my Stoic lessons. I don't know this person. I've never met this person. So the insult is meaningless. And I think that as we sort of grow, society is trying to wash out insults and wash out incorrect speech, which is not possible. Instead, we should be taking this approach and encouraging college kids, for example, to take this approach that is spelled out in these lessons. It's to render the insults meaningless, or maybe you can find some type of nugget of truth in there that you can extract and say, oh, maybe that is something I can try to improve on. So I guess what I'm getting at here in my long-winded approach is if the insult stings you, and Sierra, you talk about this quite a bit in your course as well, why does it sting you? What is it about that insult stings you? Is this something deep down you might actually believe about yourself? That's worthy of exploring. And sometimes insults really are critiques, of which that means you might be able to do something a little bit better. You might be able to improve on something. But to assign a huge emotional meaning to an insult is not a Stoic approach to life. And in fact, it's just going to bog you down.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Well, the example you used of like how that the listener did not like your laugh. I mean, your laugh is yours and it's authentic. And so you're like, well, I am not in control of my laugh. It's my authentic laugh. It's my reaction to when something is funny. So I think in that instance, you were really right to just let it go. Okay, she doesn't like my laugh.
She can find another radio station and someone's laugh she likes if she really wants to.
She has the absolute power to
Mhm.
make a different decision and change the channel,
Mhm.
for sure.
Yes.
But she took it a step further. She actually emailed, aside from me, she reached out to the station through our Facebook page
About
my laugh. But again, it's not the first time she's done this.
That's when you
Wow.
just do well.
So Amy, I'd love to hear your take on this.
So I love the fact that they said, that you should welcome insults because it's a great exercise. In fact, they say the Stoics believe that insults are a perfect example of exercising the dichotomy of control. It's a perfect way for us to use that principle in our daily lives. And the thing that I did love is, as Rob mentioned, they talked about an insult is really kind of it's a 3-step process. Number one, someone has to say something to you that is meant to be offensive, whether intentional or not. 2, you have to take whatever has been said as offensive. So you have to decide whether or not it's offensive.
Which is the dichotomy of control.
Yes. And then 3, you have to react to that insult. Since, and this is the key, without a reaction, the insult falls flat. If you don't respond, you haven't essentially fed the troll the food that they want. They want a reaction. They do it specifically to get you riled up. If you choose not to respond, then it diffuses. They even use an example here, which is great. They said, behave like a rock and do nothing. And they even say the example, they're like, literally pick up a rock, say a bunch of insults to it. How do you feel? You feel ridiculous. You feel like a fool because that rock did not react in any way. So you end up looking like the fool because you're yelling at a rock or you're insulting a rock. And so I loved that example. And again, if you don't respond, then it nullifies the entire intention behind it. And I do like the humor part. I do like what Epictetus says here, because basically it's taking the approach of, well, you must not know me very well, because if you did, you would have also pointed out X, Y, and Z. And that's one thing that I always like to keep in mind, and I always remind Rob, people on Twitter, anytime you're like, someone on Twitter said, and I'm like, okay, who is that? That's just like, that's an object somewhere. We don't know that person. That person doesn't know you.
But it's
they don't
rewarded
know your
too.
motivations.
Yeah, the trolls are rewarded in that sense.
So I always like to use it. If you say something about, like they talk about here, if you say something about me that isn't the truth, it's you that looks like the fool, because you don't know who I am. I don't know you, you don't know me. Or maybe we mildly know each other, but we don't know each other enough to, hurl those insults forward.
Well, and I love the reminder of, a person's insults or a person's comment only has as much power as you assign it or give it. So the person may be wanting to hurt you. And again, it has to be someone is trying to say something meant to be offensive. But it only has power if you give it that power.
Right.
So, you can do what, you can pretend you're hard of hearing and that you didn't hear it, right? Or you can literally just, I'm going to ignore that and I'm not going to pay it any attention. And I'm not only to their face when they give me the insult, but I'm not going to waste any energy on it. And that's one of the things I talk about in my course is why let something like somebody making fun of your laugh, why spend any of your precious energy worrying about that when it has absolutely no effect? And when other people love your laugh, it's not, it doesn't get you anywhere. It's a treadmill that you're just going to run on and you're not going to get anywhere. And then they do talk about, the self-deprecating humor. Like he says, you must not know me very well. And from a mindfulness perspective, another thing that this does, yes, you make a joke of it, right, for the other person or the other people, but actually this helps you keep your own ego in check. So everybody has an ego. Your ego is essentially your sense of self, your who you are. When we think of the word ego, we think of somebody with a huge ego. Whether you like Donald Trump or not, you can see that he is somebody that has a really big sense of self. You can make fun of him, it doesn't matter. He contains that sense of self. This is who I am. He has a big ego. But when your ego becomes so big that you can't make fun of yourself or that you can't take a critique, then it becomes hard. You're not in that growth mindset anymore. You're in that fixed mindset. So keeping that ego in check, or keeping a sense of humor about yourself, your faults, your mistakes, that allows you to have that growth mindset and to keep on growing, and to also admit, like, hey, I'm human. Like, I have bad days.
Yeah, and flaws that come with it.
Yeah.
So I want to talk about the humor for a second, because I think for certain aspects the humor works. But to use politics as an example, some of the labels that political opponents put on each other are so outlandish and outrageous. You can't just laugh it off and say, oh, you should see my other flaws. Because let's use the word racist, for example. That was bandied back and forth during the current political campaign. So how do you retort that with humor and say, oh, yeah, well, you should really look inside? That's a tough one. That one, do you ignore? In politics, it's a little bit different because, it's about winning and losing, and it's usually two people against each other, hurling insults back and forth. And the other part I would add to that, too, is I don't know the right answer to how to respond to that, other than just be like, okay, let my record speak for itself. That's what I would do in that scenario.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they do talk about this here. On page 141 at the top, number one, they talk about preparation, but they do mention the self-deprecating humor, but they say step back from the insult. So yes, it is so easy for someone to hurl an insult like, well, he's racist, you're racist, that's racist, whatever, fill in the blank. You could change the word purple for racist, right? Whatever it might be. But it's simply just saying, yes, you might not be able to just chuckle and laugh it off and be like, oh, you're such a simpleton, you don't know what racist means. Instead, you can pause and go, well, let me take a step back here. Is something that I said, why would they have interpreted it that way, other than the extreme emotional, just knee-jerk reaction?
So have them explain why they said that.
Yeah, but also use it as an opportunity to evaluate. Did I maybe say something in a certain way that could have been construed as not racist, but could have gone to that reaction where it was racially insensitive, right? Because that's usually what people don't know what racist means. It's racially insensitive, maybe. Right. Is there something that I said, or the way I said it, or was there a phrase or term that I used that could have caused someone to think that? And if after you do that, you're like, you know what? No, I didn't. Or maybe the answer is yes. And maybe you have to consult with someone else too, to just get that feedback, to say, hey, I got this response here. I'm not going to engage necessarily in a dialogue, which is what Rob always does. And I'm like, dude, I appreciate the effort of that. But when someone is hurling trolly insults to you, don't then engage with them to get them to like explain it or explain your reasons. They're not looking for reasons. They're not looking for logic. Don't engage with them, because all you're doing is providing another opportunity for them to be a dick to you. So you can look at it.
Sometimes it's fun. I will admit.
He views it as a challenge sometimes. I'm like, all right, man, go for it.
But there's also, that ties into my course, the communications challenge. Can you communicate with people that insult you?
Yeah.
Usually I can, which again was something I talk about. So to just dismiss outright, if you're trying to get somewhere, if you need that person to listen to your radio show, or if that person's on your team and you need to continue to work with them, you have to break down the insult and get past it to continue a working relationship.
Yes, absolutely. But also recognize I'm just going to say the quality of the insults when it comes to the level or gauge of response that you give, right? If someone's hurling something where they're like, I hate your laugh. You're an ugly little troll or whatever they said. There is no intelligent
ugly little freak.
Ugly little freak. Sorry. There's not an I feel like they have basically been disqualified from having a reasonable discourse of, well, why do you think that way? You know, I think
Right.
I think it's the level of the insult. If the insult is more,
you're a jerk.
Yeah.
In the office place, you can see that being a realistic
whatever
scenario.
it might be. You know, if
So
you're not
you
going to take a minute
to turn it into a conversation. If somebody says you're a jerk, right? And then if that stings in a way that gets you like, you know what, maybe I kind of have been a jerk. So maybe you could ask a really open question back. Well, what do you think I should do to improve? Or what do you think I should do to be more sympathetic? And then maybe see like what comes out. I mean, that person might be so taken aback, like, whoa, you're actually saying something back that's an intelligent thought. Or they might genuinely have helpful information, like, I think you're a jerk because when I told you my grandma died, you didn't say you were sorry. Okay, make note, you know. Or they might genuinely have some good feedback about how you could become a better person, or how you could become a better person to them.
Right.
That's actually a really effective technique.
Yes.
And it's one that I've used before, you know, because I've been called an idiot I don't know how many times. I'm like, what makes me an idiot? Like, please explain why you think. And usually it's just because they disagree with something I said, an opinion I have, or whatever. And I'll say, look, here are the facts of why I arrived at this conclusion. So clearly the term idiot does not really apply. This was a well-researched, well-thought-out opinion. You know, let's discuss what your real issue is, because that's another thing you can do in insults. What's the real issue here? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to guess with this woman who called me an ugly little freak, there's some opinion I have she doesn't like. And however, that opinion means so much to her that she just cannot like me. That's a guess. I don't know. I didn't bother to ask. But if it's in a workplace environment, a family environment, if it's the crazy uncle you don't really like who insults you all the time, what Sierra suggested is digging in and getting to the bottom of it, but being above it, right? Not letting the insult impact you, but really furthering it on and saying, is this a chance that I can improve? And I think that's what you're getting at as well, Amy.
Yeah. Yes. Is this an opportunity where I can find something that I can refine? And even to that point, I guess I'll back up a little bit, because I was saying, you know, the quality of the insults is a measure of the quality of the response. And maybe that's not the best thing, because to your point, if they call you an idiot, that's a throwaway insult that requires no intellectual thought to throw that. But I think you make a good point where you're saying, you know, even in that situation, I'll challenge them.
Without assigning meaning to the word idiot or the insult. Without
getting caught up in it. But I would also say, though, I would caution you to not become so focused on stating your righteousness and your reasons behind it, because now you're exhausting way more energy than the other person was willing to put in. And so, you know, I think there's a balance there where you can engage with them and you can say, you know, why do you think I was an idiot, or what did I say that caused you to think that? But, you know, if it then just becomes where they're throwing another insult your way and then you're explaining yourself and they're throwing another insult, that's a waste of your time.
Well, you're not cut it off.
Again, you're not having that intellectual discourse to be able to engage with someone and come to a reasonable understanding of each other. Yeah, just know when to draw the line, because sometimes I think it's like for you, I can see where it's like this thing and you're getting in like a Twitter argument with somebody and I'm like, dude, just
but we all have our own different preferences.
Don't feed the trolls.
And that's something to keep in mind. Like your threshold might be different than mine.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean yours is necessarily right or mine's necessarily wrong.
But just measure the amount of energy you're putting into it, the amount of emotional and intellectual and physical energy you're putting into defending yourself, as Sierra mentioned at the beginning, like Emil does, defending yourself against something that ultimately, you know, you're not an idiot.
Well, and
so
here's the other thing to keep in mind.
Let them think what they think.
If you're involved in relationships where insults are hurled back and forth quite often, it's not a healthy relationship, because people who have healthy relationships don't insult each other. They confront each other about issues, problems, whatever, but they don't go low, right? They don't do low blows. We don't turn into politicians or social media pundits in our own home. And you have to, that is always the measure to me of, which couples work the best, which couples don't. If you're low blowing all the time and bringing stuff up from 7 years ago, calling people, I'm like, that's a sign that there's some bigger issue there. So there's other things to pick up on from these insults, especially if they're in close relationships with you.
Right.
Rather than strangers or people you barely know at the office.
Yeah, or somebody that sees you on social media or hears you on the radio. I think, remember, what is the priority this person has in my life? So if it's somebody that you really respect or somebody that you really care about, and they do give you an insult, I feel like that would definitely be a time where I would engage. Like, maybe this is their way of trying to give me some feedback, and maybe this is an opportunity to learn from. Or it's also possible that that person's just having a really terrible day, in which case I might have the implementation plan of disarming that and saying, you sound really upset. Is there something that's bothering you? Is there something I can do to help you? Because sometimes people's cry for help doesn't sound like the word help. It sounds like, you're a butthead. And when it's people that we know well and love, sometimes responding to the insult isn't going to help anything. To your point, Amy, you're just going to exhaust that. Insults are not always intended to, it could be something else. So I think knowing when to engage and knowing when to ask questions, or knowing when to literally imagine yourself talking to a rock. I'm just not going to respond to this. And by doing that, you keep your power as it is. Like, all right, say whatever you want. It's just going to bounce right off of me, no reaction.
Bruce Lee says, be like water. So when people insult you, just go with the flow. I did love that so much. And as you guys talk, I just keep thinking about, it seems that we're going the wrong way to go back to social media, because insults are rewarded. And as you mentioned, butthead, it made me think of kids, because I think when we're kids, we go to insults because we don't, when we're 5 or 6 or 7, we don't have the maturity yet. But we know that when we do that, typically there's something about us that gets hurt. So we kind of lash out to protect ourselves. And it's survival brain. It's what your brain is supposed to do. And sometimes we still do that as adults. As you grow, you insult people less. As you
might critique,
yes,
but you don't insult.
Right.
There's a difference.
There's a huge difference. Explain what the difference is.
Well, I mean, just the difference is you can provide constructive feedback. You can provide a critique, but not have it be an armed criticism or an armed attack. I guess there's the difference. There's, an insult is, I'm going to say something to you or at you. I'm going to hurl this bomb at you and have it explode, versus a criticism or a critique is more of a dialogue. An insult is just a bomb that's thrown. The other is actually engaging in something that you come from a place of wanting to improve, to your point here, wanting to grow, wanting to help this person recognize this problem, versus just hurling it to shut them up.
In my course, I call the insults static.
Yeah.
And it fills up your head sometimes if you believe it and listen to it. And it's clearing the static, so then you can find the critique. So for example, my boss will give me techniques on how to become a better presenter on the radio. That's a critique, but it's meant to help me be better at my job, my craft, my art, if you will. Right. Versus if he says, you suck. I'm like, okay, that's number one, it's a blanket statement. What do you mean by that? But critiques come in specifically and says, hey, when you said this, you came about it the wrong way. If you approach a topic, you put in too many extra words in it, cut them down, get right to the point. You're like, okay, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Lots to learn in this one.
It was. It's trust me, it's a tough one, because it's so easy to feel that sting, right? And then when we feel that sting, we want to instinctively protect ourselves from that sting. And to your point, we revert back to our childlike reaction, which is to hurl something back. It's like hot potato, right? We want to hurl it back because we want to diffuse the sting that we ourselves feel, versus welcoming the sting and examining the sting and being willing and able and clear-headed enough to break it down, to be able to actually use it effectively in our lives.
It's true.
The inner
So
Stoic.
do you think this was useful to kind of rehearse this ahead of time and be ready for the insults, to have a plan? Did you find it useful?
I did. I think it's always good to have these little implementation intentions, these ways to spot your triggers, right? So being able to rehearse if and when an insult may come your way, be it based on past experience or a future thing that you think may happen just based upon who you might be engaging with. I think it's really helpful. And then being able to rehearse both the, brush it off, or the self-deprecating humor, being able to take those scenarios. I think for you, Rob, it's probably a lot easier because you are, you get it all the time because you've put yourself out there. I think for many of us, we haven't put ourselves out there as much, although we do still do that on social media. The moment we, post something, say something out there into the ether, there's going to be a dissenting opinion of some sort. And it's just how that opinion is expressed is whether or not it can be helpful or not.
But know that it's coming. And whatever you put yourself out there, someone's going to disagree with you, and they're going to take various methods to discount you and call you names. And it's I think how you measure yourself ultimately and how you grow is how you handle all of that.
So did either of you have a particular scenario that you identified or an implementation intention that you kind of laid out for future insult opportunities?
I'll say it's about creating space. It's what Sarah talks about in her course. It's part of the communication course that I'm doing as well. And it goes back to Viktor Frankl's ultimate point. Viktor Frankl, author of Man's Search for Meaning, who was in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany, realized that there is a space between stimuli and response. In this case, the insult is the stimuli. You're going to respond a certain way, but what's that space? How do you elongate that space to give yourself more time if you need it to figure out what your approach is going to be?
Yeah, the meaning you assign to it, right? As they talk about the 3 steps, you have to decide that it is in fact offensive, or to your point, Sarah, you take it in or guard yourself against it.
Yeah. Actually, years ago, Chris and I took a parenting class called Parenting with Love and Logic. And it's actually a really cool program. And one of the tools that we were taught is a spacer, like you just said. And so this is specifically like when your child says something to you and you kind of need time to process it. And this is part empathy and part thinking. This is what they taught us to do. Oh, wow. Or a similar sound like that. So you're taking it, like your child is saying something to you and you're taking it in and you're giving them that energy. You're giving them that energy back. You're not really saying anything yet. You're making a, oh. So they're just kind of hearing this sound and they're getting a reaction from you, but it's completely neutral, right? I haven't agreed or disagreed. And then they say you can even just wait beyond that. And they say you don't feel like you need to have any response yet. And you can just kind of let it hang out there. In my house lately, from our son, we get a lot of this comment. That's not fair. That's not fair. Okay. Now, that's not fair can be applied to just about anything that he doesn't like. So when we get the that's not fair, for example. Oh. So now it's like, okay, they hear me, right? And they hear that I'm upset. But then there's that pause. And then there can be like, well, why is that not fair? Or is it not fair, or do you just not like it? There's a difference. So that's my implementation pause when somebody is face to face. Or if it's something on social media or where it's like received Marco Polo, text, whatever, put the phone down, walk away. This is a pause, creating that space. Because half the time, if you put the phone down and walk away and give it some time, all of a sudden it's like not important anymore.
Yep. You don't have to respond, or you can choose to respond when you're ready to do it. Again, like I love that because that's essentially diffusing the bomb, right? Because they hurl it at you, they hurl the grenade at you, and you're not discarding it, you're just putting a pin in it. You're just putting that pin right back in the grenade. So it's not volatile anymore. And then you can decide what to do with that grenade afterwards. So I think, and that's huge, because again, that's where a lot of these, insult escalations come from. I know you are, but what am I kind of things. It just keeps.
And that doesn't do anybody any good.
No.
Nothing good comes out of that, ever.
No. Yep.
It's a lot of lessons.
Lot of lessons.
Hopefully you'll join us on this one, because this is one that is more impactful for more people by the day. Everyone is insulted all the time, it seems like. So this is a very good one.
It's true. It's good practice. Well, it sounds like this was really useful. So I hope you'll join us next week here on the porch for our Handbook for New Stoics book club. And next week is week 23, where we will be saying, don't speak about yourself. Ooh, I wonder what that means. Don't speak about yourself. Speak good, speak bad, speak at all about yourself. Speak in the third person. I don't know.
It might be a very quiet lesson.
It'll be our shortest lesson yet. All right. Thanks, everyone, from myself, Sierra, and Rob and Amy. Thanks for joining us on the porch. We hope to see you again soon. If you haven't joined us yet, join on, subscribe to our channel so you can see what we're talking about and join in on the conversation.
See you next time.